This is what it looks like when a swarm of Ford Everests and Ford Rangers attack the lahar fields of Zambales. If you think one Ford Ranger or Ford Everest looks intimidating, imagine seeing a squadron of more than 20 in your rear view mirror. I think it were quite a menacing sight. If you are new here, I am Jay Walker. I do in-depth car reviews and sometimes motorcycle reviews. If you're looking for a detailed, in-depth review of the Everest and the Ranger, I have a couple of those linked in the description below. In this video, we'll talk about this media drive to Zambales and what we've learned about the Everest and the Ranger because of it. Recently, I, as well as other members of the motor media, were invited to take part in this 3-day event. We drove the new Ford Everest and the new Ford Ranger from Manila to Clark, and then from Clark to the lahar fields of Zambales. What better way to get to know a vehicle than to test it at the extremes, right? I also got to chat with the person responsible for designing the Everest and the Ranger, and I got to ask him some of your most common questions. Before going to Zambales, we had to do my favorite part of any media drive, the swab test. And then we proceeded to the parking lot to test the vehicle's safety systems. Now, I've always been a proponent of active safety features because surviving an accident is good, but preventing it from happening in the first place is way, way better. And when it comes to active safety features, the Ford Everest Ttianium 4x4 and the Ford Ranger Wildtrak 4x4 are at the top of their game. They have the full suite of active safety features like autonomous emergency braking for the front and the rear, adaptive cruise control, blind spot warning. They're the only ones in their class with lane keep assist, which automatically steers the car instead of just beeping at you like its competitors. It's nice to see these features in a brochure, but you almost never get to see them tested in any review. So Ford let us do a practical test of automatic rear braking. And here is Reagan of Reagan's Rides doing his best impression of an end cap dummy. Now, automatic rear braking doesn't work 100% of the time. And I'm sure Reagan would have appreciated that information beforehand. But even if it only works 80% or even 50% of the time, it's still better than not having it at all. We also tested the Everest's automatic parking feature. You just press a button and the car does everything automatically. It even shifts from forward to reverse on its own. Now you can call it a gimmick, but it's definitely an impressive party trick to impress your friends with. And so far, the Everest Ttianium 4x4 is the only vehicle in this class that has this feature. After our parking lot exercises, we had dinner, prepared for our activities the next morning, and then retired for the night. The next morning, we headed for Zambales. Now, driving on the highway, you really get to appreciate the biturbo's 200 horses and its 500 Newton meters of torque. You get the confidence to overtake because you know that you will not be left hanging. By the way, the difference in power between the biturbo and the single turbo is very noticeable, especially on the highway. Also, there's a noticeable difference in NVH levels between the Everest and the Ranger, which should be expected since the Everest is designed to be a luxury family car and the Ranger is supposed to be a utility vehicle. There's a bit more wind noise in the Ranger, but it's still pretty good for a pickup, and the engine is the most quiet in the segment. I've said it in my past videos, we have a lot of beautiful places in the Philippines. And when I get to borrow a 4x4 vehicle, I try to showcase some of those landscapes as much as possible. Some of these places you can only access if you have an off-road capable vehicle. So vehicles like this not only give you more poggy points, they can also be a gateway to a different lifestyle. Even if you're not a fan of off-roading per se, car camping and hiking can be a totally different experience if you have a four-wheel drive vehicle. So we took these next-gen Fords to this very scenic location in Zambales. We took it around this lahar field with various natural obstacles. We drove it over water. Now honestly, I've driven previous Rangers on harsher terrain, so I know that this is peanuts for the next-gen Ranger. It was a lot of fun though. Driving through the lahar fields at speed was an exhilarating experience. The temptation to do a donut was there, but the traction control did step in to make sure that you didn't kick the tail out too much. You could feel it reducing power when the rear end starts to slide. Now thankfully, there was a traction control off button, which we didn't touch of course. It's just nice to know that it's there. By the way, almost all the vehicles in our convoy were 4x4, but there was one sport 4x2 which got stuck at the lahar field. So overall, the next-gen 4x4 Fords, that's quite a mouthful, are very capable off-road machines with plenty of electronic and mechanical gizmos to aid you. You get a rear differential lock, multiple traction control modes, hill descent control, all of which came in handy during this trip. The trail led us to this mystical place called Camp Ford, which only existed for those few days that we were there. The lake, though, is still there. It's called Lake Mapanuepe. It's a new body of water created only in 1991 after the Pinatubo explosion. We had lunch there, we had a few social activities, and then we headed back. We had to refuel on the way back. Now, we may have driven mostly on the highway, but we were pretty aggressive with the throttle, so our fuel economy was abysmal. I think I got about 11 kpl on the highway. But I did get to test the Wildtrak 4x4 and the Everest single turbo on the highway under more conservative circumstances, and they returned pretty good numbers. From 2 bars to full tank is about 6,000 pesos. Now, I wasn't sure how many vehicles we had in our convoy, but there were a lot, so the gas station made a killing on us on that day. We were back in Clark just in time for dinner, and we got the opportunity to chat with Dan, the global project manager for the Ranger program. The next-gen Ranger has been in development for the past 5 years, and while it's still based on the T6 platform, very little except for the ladder frame chassis has been retained, and even that has been modified. The global development team also took plenty of input from Ford Philippines, and I guess that explains why our local units, at least the top-of-the-line ones, are so well-spec'd compared to the competition. They really are tailor-made for the Philippine market, and not just imported as is. Now, one of your most common questions about the new Ranger is about the 10-speed transmission. Now, I have addressed this in some of my older videos, but this time I actually got to ask Dan about it. And he said, yes, it has been addressed. The issue was with a small batch of units, and they have been recalled already. Now, if there's a recall, generally it means that the problem has been identified and a fix for it has been found. Otherwise, the recall would be pointless. He also confirmed that the transmission has been updated with a new torque converter, and the transmission mapping has been updated. Now, I'm actually glad that they kept the same engine and transmission. Whenever a new engine is introduced, there are a lot of variables. One reason why Toyotas tend to be reliable is that they reuse the same engines for a long time, sometimes 7 to 8 years, and by the 7th to 8th year, most of the issues have already been addressed. The biturbo has been around for 4 years now, and that's enough time to iron out the kinks. And that's my quick summary of our media drive. Now, I was already a fan of the next-gen Ranger and Everest prior to this trip, but I gained even more appreciation for the vehicles and the people behind Ford afterwards.